highlights. But before I start with that, I just want to extend some thank yous. First, we want to thank City Council for both developing and leading the creation of a vision, which really was the guiding light for this document and the process, excuse me, but also for your commitment and your participation in the process and your provision and commitment to resources to undertake this elaborate and comprehensive analysis. So thank you. Also want to thank the community. I mean, it is a comprehensive community plan, so it really is about the people in this community. And we had over 2,500 residents participate in some format and contribute to the development of this plan. So we want to thank them. And want to thank the city staff who participated. We had over 100 staff members contribute to some degree across the corporation, and I want to extend a big thank you to them. And one particular special thanks to an individual, Kim Sayre, has been the project manager from the beginning, has coordinated, got us to this point. I think without her managing the project, I don't think we'd be here in this time in this good a fashion. So thank you to Kim. So now we'll get rolling. So what I want to cover today, it's a very large document, really is the umbrella document, policy document for the city. So this is just a sort of a highlights overview. But I want to talk about what an OCP is, what an OCP isn't, and the purpose and the reason we have one for a community. Look at the context and the drivers of change in the community and why this OCP is important and timely. Talk about the process that we've gone through over the last few years to get here today. And then just a quick overview or highlights related to the growth plan and the policies within your document. First, the purpose of an OCP. It is the umbrella document or the most important document, policy document that Council will adopt. And it sets high-level direction for the next 20 to 30 years in terms of how the community is going to change and grow over time. It really articulates the vision, establishes priorities, and develops the goals and the policies that lead, inform, and direct the next level of planning that will occur in the corporation. It also establishes the growth plan and the pattern of growth over the future in which will accommodate future population, development, and change. So that's both in terms of where we're going to grow in new neighborhoods as well as where we're going to direct intensification over time in our existing neighborhoods. And all of this leads us to set the stage for directing our short and long-term public and private investment within the community. Just as important, the OCP is a very critical document, but it is high level. So it's also not some things. And what it doesn't do is doesn't provide the answer to all of the questions. So it's important to remember that. And in saying that, what I mean is it doesn't get into specific detailed policies or regulations. An example of that is it doesn't provide specific zoning regulations. So you won't find in the OCP the parking requirements for different land uses or setback requirements. Those come next. That's an implementation tool in the zoning bylaw. So that's the next level of work that we'd be undertaking. The OCP also doesn't provide the city authority over everything in the community. One thing we heard regularly in our consultation process was that people really wanted the city to create policies or direct or have some influence in certain areas that the city just doesn't have that much influence over. And some of the common areas cited would include health, schools, housing delivery, or even private sector business decisions. And now that said, it's important in the OCP because of that we identify the role of the city, the role we play in the different goals and policy areas. And we play one of three roles. We either directly deliver programs and services. So, for instance, some of the public works that we identify, we directly construct those. Or we require others to deliver through the regulations and policies in the document. An example of that is we outline certain neighborhood design principles, and the developers who build the neighborhoods are responsible to follow those. So we require them to follow the policies in the OCP. Or in those areas that we don't have a regulatory role, we encourage others to deliver through either incentives or our policies and partnerships. And a good example and recent example of that is in our comprehensive housing strategy. Many of the policies or directions really are about the city facilitating through partnerships or providing incentives to stimulate different types of development. So in our OCP, we're tried to be clear in terms of what role the city plays in different activities. The OCP really is timely, and it's very important right now. The current one is outdated. We haven't had a complete rewrite for over 20 years. There's been amendments along the way, but it really isn't responsive to today's growth patterns or circumstances. It's also timely in that we have the vision that was led and developed by Council, and we're responding to that. And since 2005 or 2006, in that range, we've experienced quite a change in our growth patterns, both in just the population growth, shift in housing demands, household size, and just generally the changing face of the community. We've seen significant immigration growth, and our community is becoming much more diverse, which is a driver of this plan. And the context we're working within certainly is a provincial one. And provincially, our economy has been very positive, and we're trying to capitalize on some of that and really tie this OCP and the policies in the OCP to the provincial plan for growth. Another thing we'd note here is that we're at a pivotal point in our maturity. In literature, geographical literature, planning literature, it's cited that cities start becoming more self-sustaining at around a population of 250,000. So we're approaching that population, so it's important for that reason as well. And given this accelerated sort of population growth of late, we do expect it to continue. All forecasts suggest that it's going to be, it may not be exactly as it was in the last few years, but it's going to be comparable. And based on that, we're going to reach a population of approximately 300,000 by 2040. And this plan works to accommodate that, but considers the broader context, and we look out to a population of 500,000. We really do that for a couple of reasons. First, because of the forecasts, maybe not in our lifetimes, but it's very realistic that we do reach 500,000 population. And also because of the investments that we'll be making in our infrastructure to achieve the 300,000, many of those investments actually will serve us well beyond the 300,000. So we need to ensure that we preserve the land to capitalize on our infrastructure investments that we'll be making in the near term. So that said, just a 300,000 population by 2040, the midpoint of the plan, which isn't that far away, Regina's population is going to hit that critical tipping point of 250,000. And Regina is going to look very different at that point. Currently, about 11% of our population is immigrant population. 1/3 of the population at that point will be immigrant population. And in terms of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, will grow from 9% percentage to 12% by 2025. So that's just a midpoint check-in was what we'll be looking at. In terms of this plan, although this plan is a new one, the notion of planning long-term isn't new. And what this slide illustrates is the growth of the City of Regina by decade over time. And what's clear is that we've developed a pattern, a sort of a concentric pattern of growth emanating out in circles from the city center. It's a very compact pattern, and it's efficient in terms of how it can be serviced and just proximity and accessibility. So it's a pattern that we've been looking to continue within this new plan. That's the context we're planning within. In terms of the process, we developed a 4-phase process a number of years ago, and we started with just best practice research and scoping the plan. We were looking across Canada and across North America at what other cities were doing and how they were undertaking in terms of engagement and what the content of the plans were. So we did that. We also did some gap analysis in terms of looking at what type of information did we have and what type of information did we need to develop this plan. What we learned during Phase 2, building the foundation, was we were quite deficient in our information. So we had to undertake quite a number of background studies. And just to list a few, we did population and employment forecasting, priority population study, land capacity study, environment study, financing growth study. We undertook 4 engineering studies within the quadrants of the city. So all of that was forming baseline information and also looking ahead. So after accumulating and compiling that information, we entered Phase 3, which was advancing the vision. And that was predominantly broad public engagements. We spent the year engaging the public through a variety of methods, ultimately developing, and they were endorsed by Council, the 8 community priorities, which I'll be mentioning shortly. And that led into Phase 4, which was actually developing the plan. So that's the phase that we're concluding now. and that was writing the policies and working on the growth plan. And that phase also involved public engagement in terms of assisting in identifying goals and working through some of the policies. One of the critical components within that process was engagement. Engagement both during phase 3 to develop community priorities, as well in 4 to test and write the plan. And as I indicated, over 2,500 residents participated in one form or another, whether it was online input. We had a number of different web-based tools that people could provide information. We went out to events and had booths at events to get input. We held our own events. We had an ideas fair, which formed the basis, or was the sort of the workshop in which we developed the community priorities. So it was a very important part of creating plans such as this, is really engaging with the public and the residents. Out of that, one of the critical pieces was the community priorities. So these 8 priorities, which aren't listed in any specific order, were developed both with the community and with City Council, and they were endorsed unanimously at City Council in 2012, and they fed into the final phase, and they were used to guide policy development in what the document is today. Now, touching upon the contents of the document, there's really 2 essential components, and that's the growth plan, which really tells us where we're going to grow and how, and the policy section. So all the different policy topic areas which touch upon the various topics such as transportation, parks, recreation, culture, and so forth. In looking first at the growth plan, we developed 3 different scenarios, 3 different options. And each of those options we actually costed. So different from what we've done in the past, we applied a lot more rigor to the actual costs and inputs to the growth scenarios. And typically in the past we've looked at capital costs, certainly, but this plan also looked at the operating costs over time and the revenues that we could expect to generate through this growth plan. And what the plan in front of you today sort of yielded was that the revenues marginally outweigh the expenses associated with this plan. So when you add up all of the costs for this plan over the 30 years and look at the revenues that could be generated through fees and through taxes, this plan can pay for itself. So that's a new notion for this OCP that we haven't had in past OCPs. Now, the development pattern itself shows new neighborhoods that go beyond our current 235 population. So our current population is actually 200, but we have approved neighborhoods that can take us to a population of 235,000. So what this identifies are new neighborhoods beyond that. We also show the areas of intensification, including the city center and along transit corridors or major arterial corridors, which are either existing rapid transit or potentially future rapid transit. So those are the areas where we'll be focusing most of the intensification within the city. In terms of the 8 priorities, certainly over the course of the next 25 to 30 years, we'll be addressing each of the priorities, and they're all addressed within the current OCP. But we found that there were a few that sort of became more prominent and have been sort of bolstered within this plan compared to past plans, or even actually were newly added. That's something that we lacked in the previous plan. And one of those was the financial sustainability. One of the chapters within this OCP actually relates to financial policies. And that's something that we haven't found in other OCPs, so it's sort of leading edge from that regard. But it's very consistent with the approach that the organization and council have taken in the last couple of years in terms of trying to really assess full costs and implications of some of our decisions. A good example of that is the financing model for the stadium, which doesn't just look at financing the capital, but it looks over the long term of financing operating. This plan puts that upon more than just those larger works. It also puts it upon development, to look at costing out development to ensure that we can pay for it, to ensure that it pays for itself, and that we know what our revenues are going to be. The policies also look at directing us towards new revenue sources and provides guidance in how we should approach subsidization. And that's the benefits model. So subsidization by the city would be based on proportionate to the broadness or the extent of benefit that the community would be driving. So that's a principle and a policy identified in this plan, which is new. And not surprisingly, regional cooperation was something that was identified as a community priority and is really a focus within this OCP. So there's a regional chapter with policies identifying next actions and basically a work plan for the city, as well as how we should be cooperating with some of our neighbors. In addition to that, though, it really focuses on trying to stimulate and capture regional economic growth. So what this plan attempts to do is take a more collaborative approach opposed to competitive approach, and try to capitalize on net regional economic gain opposed to competitiveness. So that's prominent within both the regional section, as well as we have specific economic policies, economic development policies within the plan. And the third area of focus is one related to complete neighborhoods, so developing complete neighborhoods. And what we found through consultation with residents and the public is that people will have a different opinion on how the city should grow. People will have a different opinion on where the city should spend money, whether it's on transit, whether it's on recreation, whether it's on arts and culture. But one thing common amongst residents is that they relate to their neighborhood. Most everyone you talk to appreciates their neighborhood, and they're often looking for many of the same things within their neighborhoods. Safe neighborhoods that are connected, that provide choice of transportation, provide choice of living arrangements, and provide amenities. So one thing that everyone can relate to is their neighborhood. So there's a focus on neighborhood, focus on development of how we develop new neighborhoods, as well as how we should redevelop existing neighborhoods. So in the end, really, Design Regina is about making choices. We're making choices on where people are going to live and work, where investments are going to be made, and how through those investments we'll be able to live within our means, and how during this time of growth we can capitalize on that growth towards improving the quality of life. In terms of what's next, after today, if we're fortunate and this report goes forward, it would go to the August 20 council meeting. That's also a special meeting to consider the OCP. And at that meeting, we'd be considering the OCP bylaw. So the document in front of you right now may not be pretty because it's prepared in bylaw format. So actually, once this document is adopted by council, we'll be doing something a little different with it for our public document to make it a little more user-friendly. What you have in front of you today is bylaw format so that we can have it adopted in August. Post-August, a couple of things will happen. If recommended by council, it will be submitted to the province for approval, and the province has up to 90 days to approve the plan. And we've already provided a copy of the plan to them now so that they can start their advance review, but they do have 90 days. But within that time frame, we'll immediately start using the plan to inform our implementation planning. So there's a section in the plan, a very important chapter called Realizing the Plan, and that outlines a number of the steps that the city will be taking to execute upon this plan. And one of the important steps is this plan will be fed into the corporate strategic planning process, which is beginning in the fall. The corporate strategic plan could be viewed as a 4-year implementation tool for the OCP, recognizing that this is a 25 to 30-year plan, so not all actions will be occurring at once. That's an opportunity to look at all of the activities identified in the OCP and start prioritizing. And in addition to that, as you're aware, there were a number of sort of concurrent plans going on, including the Transportation Master Plan and a Culture Plan, which will be coming forward in the early new year for approval. And those outline some of the more detailed policies in those areas. So that is the highlights and overview. And I'll just turn it over back to the chair.
Thanks very much. Did you have a question? Yeah, we'll hold off on questions because we have delegations first, and then we'll questions to the report. So I will turn to the delegations. Mr. Kostick, if you would come forward first. On your agenda, this is 1339. Mr. Kostick had submitted some materials. Welcome, Mr. Kostick. If you would introduce yourself, who you represent. You have 10 minutes for a presentation. Questions can follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Executive Committee and Administration as well. I'm Ned Kosnick. I'm the Vice President for Regina Land for Dundee Developments. I would like to thank the committee for providing me this opportunity to address you on the official community plan. We had previously submitted a copy of our presentation so that it could be included in the agenda and you'd be privy to some of the maps and some of the points that we will be making tonight. We are here now to take this opportunity to summarize in very short fashion our position. Point number one, we are in support of the final draft of the official community plan except for the growth plan. We have been involved in all aspects of consultation and engagement over the last 2 years on the process and assured our input had been provided in a formalization of the OCP. Number two, the growth plan is intended to provide clarity and certainty as to how the city will grow in the future. The proposed growth plan within the OCP has revised the 300,000 growth of the city by excluding lands previously shown under the current development plan. We at Dundee have invested heavily into Harbour Landing West on the basis of this plan. This investment includes land purchasing, planning, engineering, environmental assessments, geotechnical investigation, risks assessments, market assessments. As well, we invested into the existing infrastructure in Harbour Landing, which is readily available for the extension into Harbour Landing West. It is not clear to us why the 300,000 growth plan in the OCP has been revised, and lands we purchased within the plan were removed. Point number three, the special study area designation in the proposed growth plan and policy statements dealing with this area could preclude development of these lands until after the 300,000 population has been reached. This we are not comfortable with. It is a clear statement of the uncertainty of continued growth in the southwest sector. This to us is not acceptable. Point number four, business, commercial, retail, office, apartment owners, schools, and all forms of homeowners made investments in Harbour Landing on the basis of the community of Harbour Landing will continue to grow as envisioned in the current growth plan. We must hold ourselves accountable to all those business owners and residents that have invested in Harbour Landing and assure that this remains a growth area. Point number five, we have presented the City of Regina with the technical, market, and financial details for the inclusion of Harbour Landing West as an area to be included in the OCP growth plan. In November 2012, we presented the City with a Harbour Landing concept plan. We have now presented the City with a full-fledged community plan and secondary plan submission for Harbour Landing West. The information requested has been provided, which supports growth in the southwest. This growth is viable and sustainable. Some facts. Fact number one, the current Harbour Landing pumping station has residual capacity to service another 300 acres of Harbour Landing West. Harbour Landing West contains 1,400 acres, 27,000 people, 137 million of servicing agreement fees payable. Dundee has invested in 910 acres of the 1,400 acres, representing 65% of the land holdings. We've based that investment based on the growth plan. Dundee investment to date has been $50 million in this particular sector, $150 million throughout the city in land and engineering and planning. Number five of the fact, interim stormwater measures are available on site. Number six, Dundee will entertain front-ending of any permanent servicing. The regional pumping station and force main of $28 million. The stormwater conveyance system to Cottonwood, $9 million. Total front end of $37 million. This is similar to the Dundee front end in Harbour Landing, if you recall, in 2007 and 2010. At that time, it was 31 million. What we would like to emphasize that, again, we are in support of the growth of the official community plan. We ask for an appeal to you on behalf of ourselves and the investors in Harbour Landing to modify the growth plan to include Harbour Landing West. Thank you, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you for your comments. Other questions of the delegation? Councillor Flegel.
Thanks. Just wondering if you've been approached since then to answer some of your questions by administration on why it wasn't included in the 300?
Not since we had the official plan in front of us. One of the administrators did provide us a letter that we expected or had requested early in the process to identify under the special study area what would be required to have it considered as a growth area. That was identified to us as early as last week. Those items, as we have garnered from our quick, short opportunity to look at the questions that the city put forward to us, have already been addressed within the documentation that has been supplied to the city.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks.
Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Costing, for your presentation. You may have just answered the question, but I'll ask it maybe in a slightly different way. This special study area, as I understand it, is there because there may be material or information missing that's required. Are you aware of what that is? And that's the first question. The second question is, what is your understanding of this special study area?
To the first question, we have, as I indicated earlier, with the letter and at our request, the administration has outlined what they felt was required from us to be provided to them to provide them the additional information. That has since been provided to them. Number two, the special study area. When I read the policies, I understand what the intentions are, that they need to maybe have some time or needs additional information to make that final decision. But when I read the policy document, it's not clear. It actually precludes the opportunity to develop. It says if in any way, and I apologize, I'm not quoting, but I'm simply going from recall. It simply says that in no way should the introduction of, say, West Harbour Landing in any way negatively impact the 300,000 population growth areas that are identified. With that, I would say, with any one developer or at any one objection, that would say, yes, there would be a redistribution of the growth. So that would be my answer to your second question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, just for clarity for my purposes and others, from your recollection, what is it that the city was asking you to respond to, or what information were you asked to provide? Can you detail what that is?
Very technical with respect to support on the waste management, storm management, transportation. A lot of the information that would be required of any of the growth areas, the impact on the citywide wastewater management system, the impact on the overall transportation of the city of Regina. A lot of those are in the process of actually coming forward to this very committee and council, like the transportation plan. So those we identify with those bits and pieces. Of course, we are prepared to provide that information. We feel that we've provided as much as we have right now. We want to work with the city to assure that we've identified any of the concerns that are out there. Will there be impacts? Yes, there will be. Growth will have impacts in various locations. We've identified the financial impacts, and we've addressed those clearly.
One last question, Mr. Chair. Do you believe that the timing of the submission of that information may have been a reason as to why this is a special study area, not part of the growth strategy itself?
It surprises me because it was originally a growth area. all of a sudden it was taken out, and I don't have any clear understanding of why it was precluded. Why was it taken out of the original development plan where we have made investments over the last 4 years into the southwest sector? And all of a sudden, it's taken right out. Then eventually, because at a lot of the open houses, it was not even there. After some inquiries, it was put in as a special study area. And that happened in early June. So in answer to that, that's something the administration should answer for you.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you for answering my questions.
Councillor Hinks?
Thank you, Mr. Cost. And you seem a little more tense than usual today. I'm wondering, when you in your talks with the administration, did you feel like you were getting the kind of answers you wanted, or are you just kind of left in the dark kind of thing? How do you feel about it?
Well, firstly, I think I want to make clear, I'm very passionate about this particular point. I feel our company has done everything it should have done. We participate in the process. We input in all times. We provided all our comments to the plan, to the growth plan. We basically felt that we were not informed. We were informed like everybody else. It showed up on the website. We pulled up the plan. We didn't expect that the final recommended plan would completely eliminate the southwest lands. And that was the June 4th, I believe. I may have my days wrong on the delivery of that particular plan, the recommended growth plan. After that, in a matter of days, they put in a special study area for only a portion of Harbor Landing West. Since then, they've now added it in as a higher level. No, I did not feel comfortable with any of the reasons that the city administration presented to it. There was nothing factual to say it was removed because of a fundamental servicing issue, of a fundamental expense issue. So that's why I'm very passionate about this, because I don't understand. We have not been given clarity as to why West Harbor Landing is not included when it was previously included in the growth plan. Not only did we have this issue, we had Foxdale Grove that was also included in the 300,000 growth plan, and that's up in the northeast, north of Victoria Avenue. We understood from what the city gave us with respect to some of the wastewater management issues that have to be addressed regionally for that area. We understand that. We're not here to discuss that. We said, fine, we understand what the points are. We will work with you on that. We hopefully will be dealing with it in the future, and I think fundamentally the administration agrees with that. They will be working on that very carefully to handle that particular aspect. So we understand that particular rationalization. We don't on the Southwest.
You've always had a really good relationship with the people at City Hall here. Do you have any meetings or anything planned to talk about this or anything?
Well, I think, number one, I still have a very good relationship. We are just on fundamentally opposite sides of the page on this particular point. I would never for 1 minute say that we do not have a good working relationship. But I know from discussions with city administration, just even before this meeting, we will be working through this. And we need to work on it. Now, time is of the essence. We have made commitments. We are going to be at the boundary of Campbell Street with roads that go nowhere by the end of this year. I don't know where they're going to go. I would say, yes, I understand there's annexation required. That is fundamentally supported by our company. And we understand that. And we will see growth occurring from that particular aspect. But we need, when you look at a special study area, I have a high school or a school being planned in our community. I can tell you right now, if we don't have this as growth area, and maybe, the Board of Education will definitely not want to be looking at a school. So what does that leave us? It leaves us in a very, very awkward position. I need some answers. I'm appealing to this committee to at least send us back to the table to work over the next month to see if we can't resolve something. Like, I don't know what the issues are. And until I know what the issues, we've addressed the issues with the administration. Unless there's a gap somewhere that I'm missing, I wish that would come clear to us. And I would expect the administration at all time have made it very clear to me they would be very transparent with this process and give me all the information I need. I have nothing to hang on to say that's the reason we're not proceeding with growth in Harbour Landing West. I don't have that in front of me today.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't think there's any other questions, Mr. Costa. You may return to the gallery. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
The next item on the agenda is 1340 Stu Niebergall. Mr. Niebergall is not here. Is there anybody here to represent Mr. Niebergall? I think there are none, so we'll take this as an information item. Can I have a motion? Thank you. On that, Your Worship, I'll call the question on that. All in favor? Opposed or none? Thanks. So I'll move on to the next one. Mr. Linner. Welcome, Mr. Linner. You know that you have 10 minutes to make a presentation, and we also have some materials from you, and then the questions could follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Your Worship, members of the committee. My name is Bob Linner. I'm here this evening in my capacity as a professional community planner representing Northridge Development Corporation. With me is Mr. Patrick Maw, who runs the Regina office of Northridge, the housing sector. Mr. Chairman, again, as Mr. Kostanek did, I'd like to express to you our appreciation for the constructive, professional manner in which this plan was prepared. Certainly the process and consultation were very positive, and we're here to support it, but raise some of the same comments that have been raised by Mr. Kostanek, although quite a different context because of the scale and nature of it. But we represent, Northridge owns 80 acres of land, as I indicated in the brief that I presented to you, in northwest Regina, lying east of Pinkey Road, south of the Goulet Golf Course. In our mind, a very logical extension of the West Hill neighborhood, and the development of which would be very consistent with that solid principle of developing complete neighborhoods, infill development, brownfield development, and the compact urban form. This land, for reasons that, and I must admit I was here when it happened, was not designated for anything under the current official community plan. It simply is blank on the official community plan. The land was annexed into the city in the 1970s. The north half is zoned urban holding. The south half is zoned IC, heavy industrial. I believe that's a residual from a time when there was some industrial development on this site many years ago, long since removed. About 4 years ago, Mr. Chairman, Northridge advanced the proposal to the city administration to pursue the process that would be required to have the land approved for development. That would have required an OCP amendment. Northridge did do an engineering study, submitted it in September of 2011 that showed the serviceability of the land. We were offered the opportunity at that time to prepare a concept plan and submit an application for an amendment to the OCP, but the decision was made, I think the right decision, to participate in the more comprehensive process that you're now ongoing so that this land could be considered for phasing and development as part of the overall comprehensive OCP that you're now about to approve, rather than dealing with it as a one-off amendment. I want to discuss a little bit some of the same nature of the issue that Mr. Kostanek raised, although I must say that the scale and nature of it is different because Northridge does not have an abutting development. This would be their first major land development in the city. As we went through the process with your administration, the first options that Mr. Carlson referred to show this land as part of the existing development areas. In other words, it was viewed as being part of an extension of the existing neighborhood and approved development. As the plans unfolded, the land was actually shown to be part of the 500,000 population. We raised a number of concerns on that with your administration to discuss what that meant and why this land would move from being part of a logical extension of the existing neighborhood of West Hill to a longer-term piece of development. We accept that there are some servicing and access issues, and those have to be addressed. Unlike the presentation from Mr. Kostanek, those studies have not been completed. As it evolved, this land was designated as a special study area. Initially, it was the only area designated as special study area. Subsequently, the lands that Mr. Kostanek referred to were included as a special study area. As I understand the nature of the special study area as written, it's an enabling piece of document, policy, not a prohibitive piece. It provides that this land can be developed and will be permitted subject to various pieces of studies to be done on servicing, access, contiguous connection to the existing neighborhood, intensification, and consistency in compliance with all of the other policies. So we did not view the designation as a special study area as restricting, but as an enabling tool that the landowner would have to work with your administration on to document the case of how and why it could be developed. We certainly would have preferred that this land be designated as part of the extension of the existing approved neighborhood so that it has greater certainty of development rather than being a special study area. We would submit to you that all new growth areas will require the same kind of analysis and study as a special study area. Serviceability, compliance with all of the policies of the document are all going to have to be met, Mr. Chairman. But as we read it, and we've certainly been prepared to accept that the administration in good faith presented this area as a special study area with the onus on the landowner, as it should be, to document the various elements of servicing and development and compliance with policies that will allow it to be developed. Should there be a change by this committee and council and removal or change in the designation of the other parcel of land you just heard from, I think we would want to have an equal discussion with your administration as to why this would be the only parcel of undeveloped land within the existing boundaries of the city that would be designated special study area when, by all appearances, it meets all of the criteria. We fully support the community priorities and all of the various policies and documents that were listed, the efficient use of infrastructure, the development of complete neighborhoods, the compact urban form, the contiguous development, intensification, brownfield. And as I submitted in my brief, I would believe that this parcel of land can meet all of those criteria. It's abutting an existing neighborhood. It will add 2,000 to 3,000 population to fill that out neighborhood. It will address compact urban form. It will be intensification. It was, in fact, a brownfield as defined by the policy because it was at one time industrial and is now underutilized. There's a very important statement on pages 47 and 48 of your document that says, through a compact built environment that capitalizes on infill opportunities and complete neighborhood development along Regina's periphery, the city can optimize its infrastructure and service delivery. We would submit that that statement fully applies to this parcel, and we're prepared to do the work with your administration to document that. To exclude this land from early phase development would abandon the policies, principles, and objectives, leaving this infill area isolated and vacant, the neighborhood incomplete, and existing infrastructure utilized at less than its capacity. We understand the next stages, should you adopt this, Mr. Chairman, is to move into a phasing plan and to then identify those areas for next development. We want to be part of that process and believe that this parcel should be included in those next phases as part of the existing approved development to fill out that neighborhood. We're prepared to undertake the necessary studies, to undertake the robust stakeholder engagement, the design charrettes, the concept plan process. An OCP, as everyone has said, is an enabling document to lay out the policy and framework for how the community should grow. We recognize there are some timing issues and infrastructure issues. We'll have to work with your administration and the other developers in the west central and northwest sectors on particularly the development of the Pinkie Arterial Road, which will be essential to access and development of this parcel of land. Mr. Chairman, to conclude, Northridge Development Corporation is one of Saskatchewan's largest integrated housing and land development, developing market-sensitive and affordable housing and higher densities throughout the city. This would be their first major land development in Regina, and it would complement their current level of house building and active participation in the Regina building community. We believe the OCP provides a framework for that to happen and provides us the confidence that Northridge is prepared to invest the additional cost in bringing this land onto development and working with your administration. The policy framework of your OCP provides that enabling basis, and we take that in good faith and believe that we can show that this land, once integrated into the West Hill neighborhood, will be a valuable addition to achieving the objectives of your plan. Mr. Chairman, we thank you for the time to listen to our submission, and on behalf of Northridge Development Corporation, we offer you the support and the commitment to work with your administration to take the development of this land to the next phase as contemplated in the document.
Thanks, Mr. Linder. Before I turn it over for questions, I seek one point of clarity. Because it was previously developed, is there any servicing to the area? Water or sewer?
Servicing is in the abutting area, but it is not on the site. This land will require a full servicing analysis. As I pointed out to you, we had AECOM do a study September of 2011. They submitted the study to your administration showing the serviceability of this land.
Thank you. Councillor Hinks.
Thank you, Mr. Linder and Mr. Mott. my question is Mr. Ma. I know a little bit of the history of your company. I think you came here 12, 14 years ago from Saskatoon, and when Mr. Lynch says that this is your first major development here, I'm sure that you were doing. This isn't your first experience with development. I'm sure you've had more in Saskatoon and other places. I'm asking you if you have.
Yeah, as far as actual development in a larger municipality, we have done several in Saskatoon. Our largest one right now would be in Stonebridge, which is actually a Dundee development. They're developing a big commercial strip right now, as well as they've got a large parcel on 11th Street. They're looking at doing some higher density housing on as well. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could just clarify what I said, and my apologies if I wasn't clear, was this will be the first major land development that Northridge would do in Regina. They've been very active in land development around the province. In Saskatoon, are currently developing a major 300-acre new subdivision on the growth of Martinsville. They're very active in house building, but this would be the first large chunk of land that they would actually be the land developer on, in addition to a house builder. I didn't mean to suggest they haven't been involved in land development.
You were clear. Thank
No,
you.
and I just want to make that clear too, because we've had a lot of developers that don't do a very good job that aren't developers, and I want to make it clear that they were developers. Yep. When, like you and I have talked, Mr. Ma, you and I have talked quite a bit about this, and I was really excited about what you showed me. I'm wondering, in talking with our administration, what are you feeling like? Are you feeling left out? Or are you feeling like you're coming to some sort of I don't know what the word is, but are you so some sort of finish to it, or do you feel like you're just put out?
Mr. Chairman, if I could answer that, we went through about 3 sets of thoughts. When the plan started to first evolve, this land was shown, as I said, in the options that Mr. Carlson was showing you, as part of the existing neighborhood. So we were seeing it as we contemplated that this was an infill area to complete the West Hill neighborhood. It went from there to excluding it from development until the 500,000 cycle. After we had some very constructive discussions with Mr. Carlson and Ms. Harlock, we evolved around to they identified that this would be a special study area. The initial language they provided around that was language we did not find favorable, because essentially we thought it precluded development of this land rather than enabling it. The current language in the document shows it, in my view, in a constructive way. The language is framed to say this special study area, development shall be permitted, providing it meets the following criteria and they're developed and the policies of the OCP are complied with. So we've moved from very positive to somewhat frustration after a constructive conversation to believing that the designation and the language is enabling and opens the door for the constructive conversation to move into the next phase, to have this land designated and shown to be capable of being developed and compliant with your policies as part of the early phasing of development to complete that neighborhood. So at this stage, we're very positive.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the delegation? I see none, gentlemen. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to call Mr. Ken Taylor forward, please. Members of committee, Mr. Taylor provided a written document. You should have that in front of you as well. Welcome, Mr. Taylor. As you saw from the previous delegations, please introduce yourself, who you represent. You will have 10 minutes for a presentation. I noted that you have a paper copy for everybody here of some information. They have that, and we may have questions for you after.
My name's Ken Taylor. I'm the Secretary of Individuals with Disability Equity Alliance of Regina. I also have Melissa Norris here, who's our VP. There's a number of other of our board members that would have liked to have been here. I think you know Jamie McKenzie. He's on our board, but he's in Saskatoon. He's a family emergency going on there. Individuals with Disability Equity Alliance is better known as IDEA Regina, is a grassroots alliance dedicated to full citizenship for individuals with disability. Our goal is to eliminate barriers and disadvantages for all people with disability and achieve a more inclusive society. We believe that progress has been made, but much more needs to be done. One of the things that struck me was the similarity between some of the experiences of the other gentlemen that were here. We agree that there's a need for a comprehensive plan. We have in some ways, we were quite content with some of the dialogue that went on. We have some concerns about outcome. We were involved right from the start with Design Regina. We were involved in the, I think it was February 2011 priority population studies. And at that time, we brought information forward about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And indeed, that convention lays out a comprehensive plan, very similar actually to this plan, for dealing with issues around disability. Following that, we mounted our own session with a speaker from the Council for Canadians with Disabilities about the convention and its implementation. I can't say, invites were extended to city people, but I'm not sure that anybody showed up. Following that, in October of 2011, we attended a forum that was sponsored by the city's Access Advisory Committee, and we were quite pleased with some of the information that came out of the Access Advisory Committee. They talked about developing a more focused, strategic, and consultative approach to planning and development of program services and infrastructure as they apply to people with disability. We agreed with that. We subsequently submitted a paper to the AAC called The Next Step, in which we suggested that the AAC go to council and talk a little bit about the convention. We suggested that the AAC use the convention as a model for future direction. That recommendation then went to the Community and Protective Services Committee, who in turn asked the administration to come up with a paper about where this should all go. Give background, and based on that paper, the AAC in fact did accept the general principles outlined in the convention. It didn't go as far as what we would have wanted, but it was a start. And I guess that kind of shows the parallel path that we've been taking. We've been working with more than Design Regina, but I think I'm concerned that maybe some of the links haven't been made here. It's true that the community plan contains some of the issues that we in fact had raised. We submitted both to the housing strategy, the cultural strategy. We have done some work around transportation. We have, we're a very limited community organization, but I think we've done a lot of work around this. Some of the outcomes that we saw in the plan were special housing, social inclusion, developing an integrated multi-module transportation system, promoting age in place, and there was talk about what that meant to keep, allow people to stay in their homes and their neighborhoods, and coordinating accessibility actions was another reference. However, it appeared to us that our main theme, either we didn't broadcast it well or it wasn't received, was that we saw the articles of the convention as an integral part of the community plan, and that and although some of the aspects here we're saying there's a need for a full community involvement, and in my reading of the community plan, there's no reference to it, and that's concerning to us because it talks about being a kind of an overarching plan that sets priorities and will guide other things that are done by the city, other policies and procedures, and its absence concerns us. In some of our submissions, we also made reference to Canada. We provided this brochure, which is put out by the Association of Canadian. I'm on this French slide, which I can't read. The Canadian Association of Statutory Human Rights Agencies, of which the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission is a member, and it states in here that every level of government in Canada, that includes municipal governments, will have to review all their policies, procedures, and their day-to-day operations in light of this. Now, and there seems to be some kind of a message here that we, this is something that can wait, and we don't agree with that at all. And in fact, some of the, I'm not going to go through it right now, but I included some appendices in our paper that suggest that that things are moving along. I guess the basic message that we wanted to get across is that we really see a need here for looking at including these two elements, the community plan and the various articles of the convention. We see them as being quite complementary, and in fact, we see the community plan as being sort of not quite filled out without it, and we're suggesting that the Executive Council ask Design Regina or the administration to include a prominent reference and background material on the RCPD, the convention, and go forward from there. I don't know if there's anything else I can add. We certainly feel that we've communicated, but like some of the other presenters, we're not clear why some of our sort of the key points in some of our material hasn't been picked up on.
Thanks for your comments. Other questions of our delegation? Councillor Hinks?
I look through this, and I agree with a lot of things you say, but I think the city is doing a lot of these things you're talking about. But there's one issue that comes up, and it says special housing to include independent living. Well, as you know, the city doesn't build or have the resources to build houses. Have you been talking with builders and developers about adding this into their plans, because they're the ones that build places?
Well, in our submission to on the housing, we in fact mentioned that that this is something that developers should pick up on, and we based some of our comments on there was an article in the Leader Post about that very topic, and we based some of our comments around that.
But again, I'm going to ask: Are you talking with the builders and developers about it, or just putting submissions in? It's, in order to have stuff like that done, you have to talk to them.
No, I haven't met with them directly. No, we're part of a community board, and when you say that the city is doing these kind of things, I guess my response would be that this plan needs to ensure that some of those elements are present when the developments go forward. As a community, we have no problem talking to them or communicating with them within our capability of doing that. But at a certain level, the elements around what's acceptable need to be part of a plan.
But don't you think that those are when you talk about housing, the people building the housing is who your group should be meeting with and talking with to try and develop that area? And I know the fellows that are out here right now they develop to what the market is, and if you can show them the market that it's there for it, I'm sure that I'm hoping that you decide to meet.
Well, I guess I'd be open to that too. Yeah. There's probably a number of linkages that could be made here, and this is just one of them. But our basic message here is that we think there's something missing here. And whether that's because we didn't communicate it adequately or whether it wasn't picked up, but we're encouraging you to take another look.
But don't you think that's part of your responsibility, though, too, to
Well,
tell
we've
people
been
things?
doing that. We've been trying to get people's attention for quite some time. It's not easy, getting, say, press coverage or anything else. We are an advocacy group. We tend to push the envelope, and some people don't respond very well to that. We think we have an important message, but we're quite willing to talk. But within recognizing that we don't have a lot of resources and a lot of time.
Okay, thank you.
Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I don't want to simplify this request. I want to state it back to you and ask you if I'm clear on this. Mm-hmm. Are you recognizing that in the official community plan there are references to your concerns, but there isn't a stated reference to the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities? It's not referenced explicitly within the document. You'd want to see that reference made in a footnote or a reference explicitly to that be considered as part of this plan. Is that correct?
Yes. More than be considered, I think it's an essential part of the plan. That would be my argument.
Okay, I understand. Well, perhaps we'll talk to the administration how they view this, but we'll raise with the administration. Thank you.
I might add to that one of the things that the convention talks about is a whole spectrum of things, from employment to income. There seems to be a tendency to see this as just on the social front, where in fact it's an economics issue too, and in terms of employment, whatever, and. So therefore, I see it as relating to a lot of the plan, not just a certain section of the plan.
Good. We'll ask the administration to review on that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions of the delegation? I see none, sir. You may return to the gallery. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Mr. Brett Dolter. Good evening, sir. Welcome. Would you please introduce yourself, who you represent, and you as well will have 10 minutes for a presentation. Questions may follow.
Thank you. My name is Brett Dolter. I'm just representing myself as an engaged citizen. I'd like to thank you for this time, and I've prepared a few notes that I'll read from. I'll provide them to council after my presentation so that you have them. First, I'd like to congratulate Jason Carlson, Kim Sayre for the good work in creating this draft OCP. I'm here to speak in support of the OCP vision for a more compact and complete community that provides a high quality of life. And I'm also here to propose 3 additions to the plan as it stands. I'm pleased that the OCP emphasizes increasing density within the city. Goal number 3 of the draft OCP is to enhance the urban form through intensification and redevelopment of existing built-up areas, which includes the preparation of an intensification development strategy. I would like to propose that greater clarity is needed around how intensification will be prioritized and how greenfield and suburban development will be minimized, and that robust policies for intensification should be integrated directly into the OCP. We know from best practices in other communities that critical urban form characteristics are required for creating compact, complete, and vibrant neighborhoods. There are 3 characteristics I'll focus on tonight, and for each I propose additional wording that can be incorporated into the OCP in order to ensure these characteristics are achieved. The first is density. So we know that a dense city increases opportunities for active transportation and transit and adds to the urban experience. The OCP identifies a gross minimum density of 50 units per hectare, which is a good minimum threshold for active transportation and transit. In addition to achieving this higher degree of density in nodes along important corridors, I suggest that this minimum required threshold should be applied in all sites across the current boundaries of the city. And since much of Regina falls under this threshold today, this means that nearly all growth in the foreseeable future would be focused within existing urban boundaries until that density is reached. And so a proposed addition to the OCP would be wording such as the following, that a gross minimum density of 50 units per hectare shall be applied in all sites across the current boundaries of the city and any future extended boundaries of the city. The second characteristic of, that I'd like to highlight tonight is connectivity. So this is a measure of a community's physical connectedness, how easy it is to move around in a community. It affects the availability of alternative transportation options and influences the distance that you need to travel between destinations. And so to achieve connectivity, I would suggest that block perimeter sizes should typically not exceed 600 meters, which represents a significant departure from how Regina's peripheral neighborhoods are being developed, but is in line with the characteristics of the downtown of Regina, which is a very workable example of high connectivity. So a proposed addition to the OCP would be to state as a guideline within it that block perimeter sizes should not exceed 600 meters. The third characteristic is mixed land use. So we know that residents living near multiple and diverse retail destinations make more frequent and shorter shopping trips and more trips by walking and cycling. The odds of walking as a mode of transport are twice as high in communities where there is a good mix of residential, commercial, and public land use. And so to realize the good vision and priorities outlined in the OCP, we have to use density and other land use tools to get a greater mix of destinations in each of the neighborhoods. Research tells us that this involves ensuring that something like 10% of land use within each neighborhood is commercial and employment-based. So a proposed addition to the OCP would be to require that 10% of land uses in each neighborhood are commercial and employment-based. And so in each of these cases, I'm recommending that the OCP define in a quantitative measure some of the good principles that it contains. I know there's some, it was Jason Carlson spoke to the next stage where more detail will be provided, but I think it would be useful if, as a minimum guideline, some of these definitions, I would call them definitions, are put directly in the OCP, definitions of what it means to have mixed land use, connectivity, and density, good density for the city. So, in conclusion, the City of Regina should be commended for their good work in undertaking a community consultation that is impressive in its comprehensiveness and inclusivity. We can be confident that the vision and ideas in the plan are championed by the citizens because of the engagement that's gone on. And so let's make this vision a reality by ensuring that we bring a high degree of rigor to the wording of the document so that it can be implemented. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Other questions of our delegation? Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation, Mr. Adulter. Just like to ask about the numbers in your 3 points. 50 units per hectare is referenced in the OCP. As far as 600 meters for block dimensions and 10% for commercial employment-based land use, can you just tell me where that...
I can provide references of
okay.
instances where that is, I guess, suggested by research as a good parameters for walkable and livable communities. So if the council desires, I can get some references and provide those.
Okay. And just off the top of your head, what does 600 meters look like? Like,
I think,
so standard downtown
it's closer
block?
to standard downtown block than it would be to sort of a larger cul-de-sac style where it's harder to connect between locations.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? So I have a question for you. So you may have noticed I look a little older than you, so I'm going to propose something that you and I do. You and I are going to go to 3 coffee shops, one in the south, one in the north, and one in the east, just so we get 3 different areas of the community. And when we walk in, I'm going to go to all the younger people, and you're going to go to all the older people, and we're going to have a discussion with them about density. I'm asking you how welcome you and I would be into that conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. We should try. Let's have a 3 dates.
I would enjoy, by the way, but yes.
I speak, I guess, I've not always lived in Regina. I've been in Vancouver. I've been in Toronto, and so I've experienced different sorts of cities, and the type of experience you get in those cities. And I think that the urban experience can be very rich when you have diverse communities, compact communities with high density. And I think that, yeah, there might maybe if you're suggesting there's a generational difference in the way we think about these things, perhaps, but I think that there is a high quality of life that can emerge from those sorts of communities. And I also think, part of the motivation is to have a better city with a good quality of life. And the other part is a sense of responsibility to try to reduce our environmental footprint. So these are also the type of neighborhoods where you reduce people's environmental footprint and their greenhouse gas emission footprint, which in this day of weather on steroids is becoming increasingly important. So I think that there is that dimension of responsibility. I think that I'm hoping that the city has outlined in the document a good sense of responsibility. So I'm just asking if they would put a quantitative definition to that sense of responsibility.
Thoughtful answer. Thanks very much. I see no other questions. You may return to the gallery, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next delegation is Chad Jedlick. Evening, Mr. Jedlick. How are you?
Good.
Good. Welcome to Executive Committee. If you would introduce yourself, who you represent, 10 minutes for a presentation, and questions can follow.
Thank you. Good evening, members of Executive Committee and City Administration. My name is Chad Jedlick. I am the residential land manager for Harvard Developments. 110 years ago, our company began operating in Regina as a result of a residential land deal. Since then, the Hill companies have diversified into many industries in Regina. However, our core business has remained real estate, both commercial and residential development. The official community plan in front of you tonight will have untold impact on the future of our city. As the Hill companies are so closely tied to and intertwined with the city, I am very pleased to offer Harvard Developments full support for this official community plan. Harvard Developments has been heavily involved in the Design Regina process. We have appreciated the opportunity to collaborate with other community stakeholders, for our voice to be heard on our specific areas of interest, and to listen to residents and other stakeholders representing their interest. The process has been long, and we are glad to see it reach a conclusion in time for future developments to proceed in this climate of tremendous economic growth. We applaud City Council and administration for taking the time and investing the resources necessary to undertake a comprehensive update of the OCP. It goes without saying that it is important the city gets this right. Back in 2010, the city informed developers that growth beyond the 235,000 population would be guided by this new OCP. This OCP is built on the principles of smart growth and complete communities. These are sound principles. The growth plan selected by administration adheres to the economic principles contained in the OCP, yet still provides consumers with sufficient choice throughout the city. One of the new growth areas identified in the OCP is our land on West Dewdney, which is shown as a new mixed-use neighborhood. We are very excited about this opportunity. The new neighborhood, which we will be calling West Terra, will achieve the 8 community priorities. We are planning this area as a mixed-use, complete neighborhood with residential, retail, and non-manufacturing prestige industrial. The neighborhood will be a higher density community with a variety of single-family and multifamily housing types focused around a central park and a new urban center. It is located less than 10 minutes from the downtown and minutes from the global transportation hub. It is blocks from A. Wilson Park, which connects it to the Devonian Pathways and Wascana Lake. The eventual completion of the West Bypass and the build-out of the global transportation hub will transform Dewdney into a new gateway to the city. We estimate there is a trade area of over 60,000 residents in that area that are underserviced from a retail standpoint. From a servicing standpoint, we believe this area has the lowest cost of servicing for any major parcel of land in the city, as all services are already adjacent or in near proximity to it. West Terra exemplifies smart and sustainable greenfield growth, and we are very pleased to see its inclusion in the growth plan. Overall, the official community plan also reflects what we in our industry believe is an appropriate balance between intensification in existing neighborhoods and smart growth in greenfield areas. The proposed balance of 70% greenfield growth and 30% intensification will keep Regina's overall economy growing and should ensure a sufficient supply of housing is available to support the growth of our families and our workforce. The inclusion of special study areas is a new element in this final draft. Special study areas had not been contemplated in previous growth plans. However, our understanding is that there may be residual capacity remaining in the infrastructure located in adjacent neighborhoods. We believe the use of special study areas is appropriate as it maintains the fundamental economic principles of the OCP that relate to financing the cost of growth, yet allow for full capacity utilization of the existing infrastructure. This OCP is driven by 8 community priorities. These priorities were developed through exhaustive consultation with city stakeholders. The plan before you has been vetted in a comprehensive manner with citizens and businesses. Administration has selected a plan that lays the framework for the continued development of a vibrant city in a fiscally responsible manner. Harvard Development supports the OCP and the growth plan, and we encourage Executive Committee to support it as well. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. Questions of the delegation? I just have one for you. Could you just give me the dimensions? I know it's Dudney Avenue. Is it Pinkey Road? And I'm not sure the south line.
It would be the railroad lines, or the railroad tracks.
CP.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. No questions? You may return to the gallery.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other delegations. May I have a motion on the report, please? Your Worship.
Mr. Chair, I'll move concurrence in the report and have a couple of comments and have a couple of questions. I want to start firstly by thanking the administration, Jason Carlson, Kim Sarah, and their staff for doing this work. There are many people behind this, and this is probably one of the longest and biggest studies that we've seen since I've been on council. And I would say that the level of consultation and engagement across the city has been unprecedented and reflects, I think, a very exhaustive and detailed review of how we see our city. This is not a report that's been done by City Hall. This is a report that's been done by the community, and as we've checked in, done the work, gone back, checked the temperature, see are we doing the right thing, have we reflected the comments and aspirations of the community. What we have tonight is, I think, an incredibly detailed and well thought out piece for our consideration for the future. So I am very much in favor and support this 100%. So I want to thank the administration for that, and previous councils and this council for moving this forward. It is time we did this. I'm very pleased to move the motion of concurrence at Executive Committee. But I want to ask a couple questions of the administration on a couple of the delegations, if I could. And I wanted to speak to Mr. Kosnick's issue with respect to Dundee and Harbour Landing West. So 3 or 4 questions, Mr. Chair, to start the process up. The delegation spoke about in previous growth strategies, this area was actually contained in the growth area, and now it is not. So just a word from the administration as to how we got to that point, and just a clarification. There are 2 sides to every story, and want to hear the administration's side on that.
Mr. Carlson.
Certainly, Mr. Chairperson. I'll explain a couple of things there. In terms of previous growth strategies that were developed and contained within the OCP, there was less certainty around the 300,000. So when that was developed, it was the neighborhoods required to get us to 235,000, and that's the extent of the detailed engineering analysis that was conducted. So this was the opportunity to look at what the growth phasing would be outside of the 235 population. And in fact, when we started doing that analysis, we had more, as I said, more engineering input than we had previously. And when we developed the 3 scenarios, the growth scenarios, the West Harbour Landing area was included in 2 of them. And when it came down to it, when we looked at the criteria which the options were rated against, and one of those being largely weighted in terms of cost effectiveness and so forth, it just didn't, it wasn't the selected option. That's not to say the Southwest on its own is a bad idea or won't at some point be developed, but it's also worth noting at that time when we looked at the land area that we anticipated being developed west of Harbour Landing, it was a larger land area comparable to what the Harbour Landing of today is in that 14,000 population range. So the cost to bring that on was very significant. There was quite a bit of infrastructure cost required up front to bring that on. So what Mr. Kostanek is suggesting now, and the information that they've submitted recently, proposes a smaller development area for approximately 120 hectares, which is about a 5,000 to 6,000 population. And as we've heard, they're proposing that that be accommodated within residual service capacity or existing service capacity. Now that's the level of analysis that we hadn't undertaken as a city. So we just want to review that information. I'll defer to Kelly Wyatt momentarily, but just to complete that thought, if that land can be developed, like the special study area, as Mr. Linner indicated, is an enabling policy. So if that land can be developed within residual capacity, there is a benefit to that. It means that we don't need to make those major infrastructure investments to bring that land on. So that's why it was excluded. We're looking at a larger area and much more infrastructure investment required to bring it on. And as you know, we can't bring on every new neighborhood all at once. It's just much too costly, and certainly we don't have the debt limit to do that. So choices had to be made. I don't know if, Ms. Wyatt, you want to get into any of that detail now?
Mr. Chair, I certainly can provide a bit of an overview as to what the special study area is intended to do and what we're looking for from the applicant, if that would be helpful.
Let's do that.
Okay. We have provided some information in terms of the request to Dundee, and we have received some elements of that analysis back. We have seen that there is some residual capacity in the wastewater system. We are looking for a bit more connectivity with respect to the water system. As I think everybody knows, water pressure is a challenge throughout the city. We're very flat. And when we add a new area, we need to make sure that that doesn't create deficiencies elsewhere. We'll work with the applicant, of course, with Dundee to resolve that as well. We have some information very high level on transportation that we intend to move forward. We have a few questions, and there's a drainage schematic that requires a bit more discussion. I'm confident we can work with Dundee over the coming weeks to resolve some of these issues and provide an update as this proceeds forward.
Your Worship.
Mr. Chairperson, I just want to also note that the policy is written such that if they meet the requirements, that there's no amendment required, that it's enabling, and that they would be permitted to proceed.
Thank you for that. That's instructive, and I'm sure Mr. Kosnick was listening about the reason why there was a change in terms of removal of the growth area and what that means. The delegation did speak that they had provided information that was requested, and now we're hearing that, of course, there may be more information that is required. So, through you, Mr. Chair, to the administration, would it be helpful to have this issue referred to the administration for a discussion between the administration and Dundee to see what is required, what can be done to either leave this in this special area or move it into the growth area, so we have a meeting of minds, so to speak, because it appears that for some time there has not been. It may be helpful to do that and have this report come back to, I believe, to Council in August when this comes to Council. If that's, I'd like to get the administration's read on that, if that's possible.
Mr. Carlson.
Mr. Chairperson, I think that would be a valuable referral.
Okay.
I don't want to preclude anybody else from speaking on this issue, but once that is done, I would serve notice of a referral motion to the administration. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hinks.
Thank you. As we move forward and grow as a city, and I see one of the, first of all, it is a great plan, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it implemented. But one of the things that were mentioned in there was sports and recreation. Like I'm wondering, places like the Y in Northwest Regina is busting at the seams, and I'm sure places like the Schmurder are seeing the same thing. And I don't mean for the city to be doing these things on their own, but we have, and Mr. Davies and I have talked briefly about this in the past, we have partners out there like the Y or boxing clubs or the soccer people, and we have 7 months of winter, and we've filled the gap as far as rinks go and that sort of thing. I'm wondering if there's any thought or talks with some of those organizations about helping fill that gap, because I really do know that things like the big gyms, they don't accommodate kids at all. I mean, the gym I was involved with for 30 years, one of the big guys came in and bought it, and the first thing they did was throw the kids out. And I'm talking about family-oriented places. Like the Y does a great job of filling the gap in Northwest Regina. And I know it's not, there are partners out there that the city would not take it on, and frankly, places like the Y are better at it than we are. And that's my question.
Mr. Davies, you got that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Hinks is right. There have been past discussions. In fact, within the last 2 months, I've had conversations with the CEO of the Y. We've had a couple of good conversations, and I know Mr. Holden has had conversations with folks representing the Y as well. There's some conceptual agreement that there's opportunities, should be opportunities for the Y and the city to work towards some joint projects in the future, recognizing that both organizations have different strengths and weaknesses, again, as Councillor Hinks has indicated. So there's been some cautious discussions acknowledging that there should be some opportunities. I suspect for both organizations the main impediment is there's just so many things going on with so many major projects. To be able to find time or resources to actually start noodling and putting plans together is the real impediment. There's certainly a willingness both from administration and the Y to look to some future developments, though.
Thank you for that. I saw on TV the other night an article about cricket and the way our population is growing in that area. Are there thoughts of the new Canadians coming in at looking at their interests and how we could? And again, I don't mean for us to build anything. I'm saying like partnerships and that sort of thing with the diverse community that we have. Just a query.
Mr. Carlson.
Mr. Chairperson, I'll begin with a response and maybe call upon Ms. Derdich to comment on some specifics. But I think what Councillor Hinks has cited is sort of the what reflects the changing face of the community on how our programs and services have to start adapting to what the new population looks like. So becoming more diverse and multicultural. Now, to that extent, I might call upon Ms. Derdich to speak to some of the specifics in terms of what she's seeing or direction we're taking.
Ms. Derdich.
Hello, through you, Mr. Chair. We have a number of policies within the document that speak to cultural diversity and working with new Canadians to look at what requirements might be for recreation opportunities. We also have policies that speak to creating recreation spaces that are flexible, that can change over time with the changing demographics of the community, and creating multifunctional spaces. So we think that that addresses some of those.
Thanks. I just have a couple other questions. We've talked about Harbor Landing. Now there was another concern on the map here. This place called Coopertown. That's another Dundee one. Is there any thought going into, like, that's right at the end of my ward there. That's one of my major concerns. And then also I want to go on to Mr. Moss, Mr. Linder's presentation too. But if maybe you can do both at once. But the West Hill one as well as the Coopertown. Do you see a solution to what they're asking for?
Mr. Carlson.
Mr. Chairperson, both West Terra, the West, that Harvard's development, as well as Coopertown, are in the growth phase. So they're identified as being the next phase of growth in the 300,000. And in terms of Northridge's property, Mr. Moss and Mr. Berliner's presentation, it really came down to just not having the full extent of understanding in terms of what the cost implications and servicing scheme would be, and trying to assess that in our bigger picture of trying to finance growth, essentially. So we fully expect that both the study areas will be incorporated, well, there'll be a referral motion coming forward, but also incorporated into our analysis of sequencing of investments and phasing of growth. And that's why there were study areas. We just simply had less information to base or to respond to their requests on than we had for the other areas.
So where would you see that going as far as like Mr. Leonard's presentation? Like, is it a long ways down the road, or is it in the near future, or like they seem to be out there in left field? They don't know what to do about it. I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm just asking.
Yeah, no, Mr. Chairperson, not sensing any difficultness at all. It's but that's the question to be answered in the work that they'll be submitting. I mean, really, that's why they're identified as study areas is because we don't have all of the answers and can't determine whether they could be accommodated within existing services or they require significant upgrades to that.
You have seen their plan, their concept plan that they have?
Mr. Chairperson, yes. All the concept plans look lovely, but there's underground costs and attached to it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Hinks, if it makes you feel any better, we've already had complaints about crickets, so they're well on their way to acceptance in the society. Councillor Fraser.
Great, thank you, through Mr. Chair. A two-part question. Is there a simple explanation for how we cost out new areas? Is it a large basket of things, or is there one specific piece of infrastructure that really sticks out? That's part one of the question. And part two, can some of that cost be overcome with density in some of these test area cases? Thanks.
Mr. Chairperson, the simple answer to the costing is when we did the growth plan itself, we looked at all of the capital, major capital requirements that would be have to be covered by servicing agreement fees or some city contribution. We looked at all of the necessary other infrastructure, if there were fire stations required, those things. So all of the components, the capital requirements were put into the equation, as well as the cost of operating all of the infrastructure that we would be developing. And that was netted against the revenues that we would have anticipated. So there's lots of formulas and spreadsheets behind all of this, but that was the basic costing. In terms of density, how that relates to density, certainly higher densities bring with it more efficiencies. So, but this plan does propose both higher densities within new neighborhoods. So as Mr. Dolter indicated, we were aiming for that 50 persons per hectare target, which is much more supportive of transit than some of the historical densities we've seen. As well, we're looking at a more dense development pattern overall for the city. So our current policy is an 80-20 split, so 80% of the development's identified for greenfield and 20% for infill within the existing neighborhoods. This plan has, as a starting point, a 70-30 split, while we also identify in the plan the need for an intensification strategy. So look to how we can really accommodate intensifying our existing neighborhoods.
Okay. Is it within the power of the city, if there were to be one of these areas come forward, though, for us to say it's possible if it's more dense? Do we have that ability to negotiate that?
Mr. Chairperson, policies can change. Our target that we'll be looking for when we review the plans will be the 50 persons per hectare. That's a policy target that we're establishing. So,
okay, thanks. And just related to Mr. Dalter's question, could you comment on how prescriptive this report is, or this document is, and could be when it comes, especially relating to density, connectivity, and land use? Thanks.
Mr. Chairperson, for that one, was getting into some of the details, so I might turn it over to Planning Director Ms. Howrluck.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, could you just give specifics, sorry?
Sure. So Mr. Dalter had mentioned that for new growth we have a target of 50 units per hectare, but not for infill, or it's not listed as a target for infill. Again, and the specifics on connectivity as far as how big block sizes would be. And finally, with land use, the mix of commercial versus residential.
Okay, for the new growth within infill, we are targeting 10,000 population within the infill, so we will be looking at that, and that goes to the 70-30 split. So we'll be looking at different programs and incentives to look at the infill, and we'll be looking at an intensification plan in order to accommodate that. As far as the big blocks, we do have a guideline of 250, that every 250 meters that there be a walkway put in place so that the communities and streetscapes are walkable, and there is connectivity with respect to that. And I'm sorry, what was the last?
Final one is a mix of residential versus commercial land use.
So within the plan, we have many policies that look at commercial and residential mixed-use neighborhoods, and that's part of the complete community guidelines that we want to see. So the specific mix has not been identified in terms of the percentage, but it is encouraged, and we look at that for within the neighborhoods and intensification for new developments coming in to leave flexibility for the developers.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if that, would that ratio be determined on a case-by-case basis, or where does that number come into play?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as we're looking at developments within with infill, obviously it is on a case-by-case basis based on the community and looking at how a new complete community or infill would work to accommodate a mixed-use development. So compatibility, when we're looking at new greenfield, obviously there's an employment ratio that we would like to see, and we'll work with the development community in determining that. But we do leave it up with the market to help guide that, and we work with the development community in achieving that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to, since it's my first experience going to an OCP, I'd like to commend Mr. Carlson and his staff. It's actually an excellent document, easy to read. I guess I do have a couple questions now that I'm kind of in a counselor role, that I'm starting to run into specific situations. So these may be questions that are more how to use the plan as opposed to changing the plan. But one of the first questions that I am a representative on the BID committee, the Regina Business Improvement District. And when I read the policy on transportation under D3, where we talk about elevating the role of public transit, certainly in full agreement. And then there's some other related policies in D5 on land use around urban center corridors, office development. All is good, except for we seem to have a small section on 11th Avenue, a 2-block stretch, where I don't think it's working well yet. And we've got the issue with all the stakeholders, the owners. They're quite concerned about the volume of buses and the location of buses and the implications around safety, security, extra security, blocking all the back lanes, blocking accesses into the office towers. And there's getting to be a heated debate about, tenants within the office towers wanting to leave, etc. Does this plan allow for changes and flexibility for an exception like that? Or do we put that in now?
To the detail.
Mr. Chairperson, this plan typically wouldn't address something at the block level of that detail, but we are doing some work around that, so I might defer to Ms. Wyatt, who's leading some work with our transit group on that.
Ms. Wyatt?
Mr. Chairperson, we are looking at some options that may work a bit better in terms of short-term solutions on 11th Avenue, and I believe there will be further direction from the mayor to proceed with some additional study as well.
Thank you.
Another area that, out of curiosity, that on Section B where we talk about growth pays for growth, I'm just curious, when you've got Greenfield, I understand kind of the formula where developers pay for most of the infrastructure. Again, I go back to the downtown core where sort of the issues of access, parking, etc. is, I think, quite a common issue that rises. Who is intended to pay for those additional costs? Because I think there's quite a hefty bill.
Carlson?
Mr. Chairperson, I'm not sure what the bill is on that, but certainly the downtown's a long-established neighborhood, so renewal within established neighborhoods comes from the tax base generally. So we don't have development levies currently for intensification within existing neighborhoods. We do draw development charges, servicing agreement fees on new neighborhoods, but one thing that we may need to look at as we look at intensification are the requirements to upgrade existing infrastructure to accommodate greater populations and greater densities. So the intensification strategy would be intended to address that as well. So something that may be coming in the future up for discussion are development charges for infill development.
I don't know if we need to address, I know we've now just set up the Mayor's Housing Commission, but I know there's a couple of questions I had in that housing section, and I guess one of the challenges I find in several of the developments we've got is kind of the conflict between say density around the quantity and affordability. That to make a lot of the developments affordable, they need to be large, but to fit the density in terms of quality and that fits into the neighborhood, there's quite a conflict. Who decides kind of what is the right quality, the right quantity, et cetera, when it comes to density and infill?
Mr. Carlson?
Well, Mr. Chairperson, the short answer is you do, and we help you. So what we've learned through this process, and I refer to it in terms of neighborhoods, we've seen a lot of intensification within existing neighborhoods. Even recently at Planning Commission and Council, we've had a number of experiences of both positive neighborhoods receiving positively and neighborhoods not receiving positively. This document has really highlighted or accentuated that as an issue that needs to be addressed, and we have identified the need for an intensification strategy which would comprehensively look at this and look at those issues in terms of how to enable intensification, how to work on NIMBY issues, and how to sensitively introduce density into certain neighborhoods. So we've identified sort of two key ways to introduce density. We've identified within our growth plan areas for intensification. So the city center is one in particular. We've identified a population of 10,000 to be introduced into that area. We've also identified major corridors for intensification. So those are the areas we would see greater intensification, so we'd have to work harder to introduce higher densities. And then we also have our existing and approved neighborhoods within the city, and density within those neighborhoods has to be introduced a little more sensitively, and we wouldn't look at introducing significant density to change the character of those neighborhoods. So that's some of the work that we need to do as follow-up, because we've recognized that as an issue, but it's something that we've never really addressed to that level before, which we will be now.
Just one which is kind of a topic in the news, our rooming house issue. I noticed it wasn't included. I don't know if it was intentional or it was coming or where that sits.
Mr. Chairperson, that'll be coming to Council likely in September now, so we'll be doing some additional work. We've had our consultation, and we've developed some policy options, and the city will be bringing forward a recommendation in time.
Another area that seems to come to me is under D9, under the health and safety, that I find that next to parking, speeding is probably one of the next most common complaints on our major streets. And I've had a number of areas when they're resurfacing, they've removed the speed humps, I think in respect of the emergency measures vehicles, because the emergency vehicles do not like having the speed humps in the road. Yet from the residents' point of view, they would like to have the speed humps. I'm just kind of wondering, there's a bit of a conflict here in the, not a conflict, but I'm just wondering where that's going, because I do have about 3 or 4 streets in my area that seem to be on a regular basis complaining about people speeding.
On speeding.
On speeding, Mr. Chairperson, yeah, those were introduced as traffic calming measures, and Ms. Wyatt has intimate knowledge of that. I think she led the program at the time. So let's go to Ms. Wyatt.
Calm, Ms. Wyatt.
Mr. Chair, I believe that might be a project that will follow me for the rest of my career. There are a number of options related to traffic calming, and the official community plan does reference good community traffic management and calming as part of the built community, or pardon me, the complete community guidelines. Speed humps are probably not the state of practice right now because of their impacts on emergency vehicles. But if there are concerns, there are other ways we can look into that. We won't get location specific in this document, but I can follow up with Councillor Burnett later.
I think that probably covers enough for me. I'll pass it on to other councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. And you understand clearly the buck stops here now, I think, right? Councillor Young.
Actually, zebra stripes work really well. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You answered one of my questions for Councillor Burnett, and that's about the older established neighborhoods that are beginning to turn over and change and grow, and are places where we can do some infill. But the neighborhood has to be a part of that, and so I'm wondering, and I think I heard you say you have some sensitivity around that and some plans for being able to show or work with those neighborhoods to show them the kind of infill that could take place that would not wreck the character of their neighborhood, as they tell me when they talk to me. So then my overriding question there is, so then most of what's in this report would also refer to the older neighborhoods in the city too, so that when you do infill, you have sections, in fact, you referred to this bylaw document as not pretty, and I'd never heard of bylaws referred to that way before, but you're right, because they feed into one another and they keep coming up. So there's several places here where you talk about design excellence, design principles, an urban design review process, which I like the sound of, and prototypes and pilot initiatives of innovative housing forms. So would you talk a little bit about architectural review and design review?
Mr. Chairperson, I'll begin with an answer related to intensification and sensitive infill and design, and maybe turn it over to Ms. Hauerluck to speak more to the innovative housing forums and so forth. But one of the policies I'd point out is within Section C, under Goal 3, intensification, and it's 2.1, and that's to prepare an intensification development strategy which addresses the following, and it lists everything, and that's where Councillor Young drew some of your comments from related to compatible urban design, appropriate forms, densities, and design controls. It's something that the city has only ventured into mildly. We have architectural controls in the Canterbury Park area on College and Broad, and we have urban design or built form code in the downtown. What we're hearing now is that design is becoming more important throughout the city, but to undertake that does require some consultation, it requires some education, and it requires some work to really establish those designs and also be selective in terms of what neighborhoods we want to focus on. So that's work we didn't do as part of the OCP, but it is part of what we're directing to be done as part of Policy 2.1. So we recognize design's becoming more important, but we need to do the work to get there in terms of establishing how we want to review design and where in particular we should focus that type of review. Related to innovative housing, I was just going to ask Ms. Hauerluck to speak to that.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Throughout our comprehensive housing strategy, which Council adopted, there's a number of different policies within that document, which are reflected also in this document in terms of looking at different innovative housing opportunities to create new infill housing within the city and within existing areas and in new greenfield areas. So the design in existing areas is very important. So within the Appendix A guidelines for complete neighborhoods, as new neighborhood plans are developed for existing areas, we'll utilize these guidelines to be sensitive to what forms of development should be taking place for infill and new changes to allow higher densities within those areas. And within that, we have architectural policies that could be implemented while we're looking at those new neighborhood plans to ensure that there is compatibility and sensitivity when we're looking at new infill developments within existing neighborhoods.
Thank you. I think that design is really important for a whole lot of reasons, not just because it looks nice when you drive down the street, but I think architectural design actually affects people. I think it affects the way they behave. I think it affects how they feel about their life and where they live. So I'm really pleased to see this much of I'm pleased to see it woven throughout in different areas. And then I'll just mention one other thing that I was really pleased to see, and that's the ecological assessment that might be required, and water protection. So all the natural areas in the city, and that's what makes this city so beautiful. And so to be able to promote that and to make it as good as we can make it and to keep it beautiful, I think is a really important part of this OCP. I'm really pleased with it. It brought some specifics to the vision. And when you just see a vision, you kind of have to see, well, what does that look like in practice? So I think this is a good start, and I was also happy to see that it's going to be reviewed at least every 5 years as we learn by doing, and as we talk to some of our partners who will be working with us on some of these policies, which ones work, which ones need to be tweaked and changed. So thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. Councillor Van Der.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the administration, one of the delegations, Idea Rojana, brought the question to saying that some of the ideas were not included in the OCP, or were not. There's some here and some not. Can you just give me a little bit more on that? How that worked? To Mr. Chair.
Please.
Yes, Mr. Chairperson. I think what we attempted to do, there was specific reference to a document that wasn't referenced, but in terms of the issue itself, we tried to weave that throughout a number of the policies in the OCP, and one was referenced, and that was housing. And in fact, there is a goal specific to specific needs within the community in trying to enhance and facilitate housing for specific needs. And in the social inclusion, social development area, there's a goal related to social inclusion. So we tried to weave those issues throughout the OCP, and certainly it's not at the level where it prescribes or regulates specific actions on a per block basis or anything like that, but certainly sets sort of the tone and overriding direction. I don't know if Ms. Sayre has anything else to add to that.
Mr. Chair, I think you've covered it, Mr. Carlson.
Thank you. I'll just continue on Appendix C and the community priorities. I always ask this one on the create better, more active ways of getting around. If a person with disability reads this, or someone reads this, what does it say? Like, if someone, just give me a little bit more explanation on, if I'm looking at this, moving about in Regina, how would I see this as a person with disability?
Mr. Carlson.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairperson, we're looking at that in a little more depth in the Transportation Master Plan, so I might turn that over to Ms. Wyatt and our consultant, Mr. Hollingworth, if he cares to come up.
Ms. Wyatt.
Mr. Chair, really our ambition in terms of transportation and active transportation as part of the TMP is to be an all-season, intermodal, multimodal transportation city for all users, and that would include anybody with mobility challenges. That's got to factor into changing design standards, into maximizing the use of conventional transit by people with disabilities, and optimizing paratransit. There's a number of specific statements there, and we will be highlighting that in the TMP, which will come to Council in early 2014.
Thank you. Councillor Van Der.
That's good, yeah. And then I'm just into housing now with the barrier-free. Because in goal 4, housing with persons with special needs, if you just give me a little more, what does this OCP will do for individuals that seeking or looking for a place to live that is barrier-free? Through Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairperson, as was pointed out earlier, the city doesn't actually deliver housing, but we do have policies to sort of try and support that, and Ms. Howrelak might want to expand upon that based on the work in the Comprehensive Housing Strategy.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as per Policy 8.15, it states that we would work with stakeholders to create and preserve barrier-free housing and housing for persons with specific needs. Through the Comprehensive Housing Strategy, we have a number of policies to which that we would work with different stakeholder groups and utilizing different opportunities for different housing incentives that could help to provide barrier-free housing. So, for example, as we work through different incentive programs, that could be one of the criteria that we use for some of our incentives and those sorts of things to work with industry to help achieve this policy.
Okay, thank you. Just to follow up on that one, that'll be my last question. Permitting care facilities for persons with disability into the neighborhoods, mixed use, how do you see that? Can you just explain that to me a little bit more? To Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairperson, that policy would relate to a recommendation in the housing strategy to really just try to remove some obstacles or bureaucracy around ensuring that these groups have accessibility to regular residential neighborhoods just by being permitted use.
Okay, then we'll follow up on the, I might be asking the wrong things, but I will ask this one. With considering 6 months or 7 months of our year's winter, snow removal within the transportation plan, within the residential area with the care homes and all that stuff, how does that look like for making transportation easier. Through Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairperson, certainly one of the challenges or one of the follow-ups to an OCP that promotes walkability in residential neighborhoods is the operational element of ensuring that they're indeed walkable for those winter months as well. So that is something that's being looked at in the Transportation Master Plan in a little more detail. So Kelly, if you want to expand upon that.
Swat.
Mr. Chair, as Mr. Carlston detailed, we are looking at winter road maintenance and sidewalk maintenance standards in order to ensure that we have an accessible community in all 4 seasons for all of our residents to the extent our resources permit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to begin just by underlining my support for Councillor Young's observation on the importance of urban design. I think whether it's a stadium or whether it's a house, the quality of design in the city brands the city, so I very much appreciated her comments. I have 2 questions, one too specific and one too personal. I'm going to try them both in any event. The 2 specific question is for the city solicitor. At the bottom of page 9 under plan coordination, there's the following sentence. This plan will prevail where there is a conflict with other city planning documents, including policies, standards, and bylaws. My understanding, and it may be wrong, is that in any legislative body, be it a council or a legislature, a subsequent bylaw or law which conflicts with an earlier bylaw or law implicitly repeals the earlier bylaw or law. It's part of the idea that one legislative body can't tie the hands of another legislative body. My question is, does this statement contradict that understanding? If not, how is this statement intended to operate? And if there is a contradiction here, how is it that a subsequent bylaw, which contradicted an earlier bylaw, is of no force and effect because of the status of this official plan? Or alternately, is this statement meant to be merely an interpretive statement, and perhaps should it be rewritten in that light?
Mr. Chair, if I could ask Councillor Hawkins to just repeat the reference in the report. I didn't catch the reference in the report. Mr. Chair, this document will have the effect of, it will be passed as a schedule to a bylaw, so it will have the legal effect of a bylaw. I would have to go back and refer to the provisions of the Planning and Development Act to confirm whether this document will have legal effect above and beyond some of the other have greater force and effect than other planning documents. I would have to go back and confirm that in the Planning and Development Act legislation.
Thank you very much, and I'd appreciate learning the answer. It's just an interesting, as I say, too technical a point. The other point is too personal. I love trees. I love trees that are big, that are a canopy, as the report says, that hang over the street, that create an urban forest, that drop too many seeds, that sometimes get diseased, that need to be trimmed because they interfere with the power lines. I love trees just like the ones in that picture. And yet, my sense of the report is that the people who wrote the plan really appreciate the value of trees in this city too. One of the things I notice, however, is that whenever we build a new subdivision, trees are put in, but they're not real trees. They're kind of, I don't know, just pretend trees. They're stubby little trees that won't in any way inconvenience us in the future. But on the other hand, I wouldn't call them a forest. I'm wondering what the plan imagines for the variety of trees, how it imagines the urban forest, and if there's a possibility that we could get back to real trees.
So I saw the solicitor raise his hand. Was that on trees or was that on a different item? Previous, okay, so we'll go to trees and then we'll come back. Thank you.
Trees first. Mr. Chairman, absolutely trees did play a prominent role, and we thank our lead consultant, John Van Nostrand, who came from Toronto and just marveled at the tree canopies here, and our gem of Wascana Park, and really commented on our need to really build upon that and carry on the tradition. So that is within the plan, and we've made the same observations within new neighborhoods in terms of how they compare or don't compare in terms of their foliage and their canopies to existing neighborhoods. So that's something that we'll be looking at, finding ways that we can introduce better tree canopy within our new neighborhoods of, as you would call, real trees. So.
Thank you very much, and perhaps the developers will take note of this as well. Appreciate it.
I have a wave, a signal, and a nod, yes. That was it? And I'll go back to the solicitor now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on Councillor Hawkins' question earlier, a section of the Planning and Development Act does in fact state that the official community plan does have other zoning and other planning bylaws do have to be consistent with the official community plan. So if there is inconsistency, then the community plan does prevail. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It underlines the importance of passing the official plan. It's almost like a constitution. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. So, Councillor Hinks, I've been around the horn once, so go back to you.
Just to follow up on Councillor Burnett's concerns, before you have this input, I would like you to take a tour of Ward 9. That kind of neighborhood was developed way back in the early 1980s, and it shows that it really works, where we have a huge social housing complex just a few blocks away from $2 million houses in Skyview, and small lots, big lots, little lots. We also have an Aboriginal seniors home, a co-op seniors housing area, a John Howard house, many ranchero houses, and everything, and it's all mixed together in one neighborhood, and it fits very well. And like I say, I hope that the powers go and investigate how Ward 9 does include every type of housing possible, duplexes, the whole works. And the key to it is, other than a couple a year, the worst crime we have out there is kids hanging around a park in the spring. Thanks.
So to the powers which are on this side of the horn, just so you know. So, Your Worship, I know you asked to speak. I wish to add some comments. Are you doing your referrals now?
No, I'm not.
Okay, go ahead.
Another issue.
Go ahead then.
I'll leave mine to the end.
Please.
The referral, that is. I wanted to follow up on Councillor Fundura's comment about those with disabilities and in reference to the delegation about the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. To paraphrase, in my understanding of that, is it wasn't just the notion that this document was not referenced, it was not inculcated in the report, not embedded in the report as a process. And I just want to get the reflection of the administration on this. I think the delegation has been attempting to comment on that and have that issue brought forward in a way that reflects back to the organization. And I'm referring, of course, to the delegation's one here. It's one that was handed out. This is report 41. Comment by the administration of how far we've embedded that information or thought about it with the community plan.
Mr. Carlson.
Mr. Chairperson, I know the Accessibility Advisory Committee has done some discussions around that, and I might call Mr. Holden, who's been a part of those discussions.
Just when he thought he'd get off scot-free, he's got to answer a question.
I couldn't find him hidden back there.
Mr. Holden, please.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. The UN Convention on Persons with Disabilities has been discussed
at the Accessibility Advisory Committee. It has been discussed at the Community Protective Services Committee. It was always thought that, the concepts and the guidelines that are within the convention, and there are 8 of them, are reflected in the vision of the City of Regina in terms of inclusiveness and people living in harmony. It's reflected in some of the policy statements. So at the time, we said we would slow down our work, wait for the OCP to be approved, and then go back and take another look at exactly how those guidelines in terms of the convention can be incorporated into the work that we do.
Mr. Chair, just a comment on this, and I want to thank Mr. Holder for that response.
Yes.
I think it shows how comprehensive the OCP is, and other documents as well, and other committees that do work for to reflect the priorities of persons with disabilities. So I'm comfortable with that. No one particular perspective dominates. This is a gathering of many different concepts, and through our vision statement to this document is very consistent. So I'm comfortable with that comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to take my opportunity to speak. So I'll start to Mr. Carlson. I have a question. In the opening presentation, you made a statement in it, if I quote, I think, cities are more self-sustaining when you hit about 250,000. Could you explain that to me, please?
Mr. Chairperson, there's just a concept among economists or urban geographers that cities at that point become less dependent upon what's occurring around them and start generating some of their own economic development. And certainly in the context that we've put Regina in as sort of the economic driver within southern Saskatchewan, that's just an important concept, and we're approaching that point.
Thank you for that. Just have a couple of rather more specific terms, and so I'm going to refer to the section D4 in infrastructure, and there's a term in infrastructure is defined, potable water, managed stormwater collector. This is a different definition of infrastructure than I recall us using when we were having rather national discussions on the need for funding for infrastructure and so on. It's page 43, by the way. So is this meant to be an inclusive term, or is this meant to be a descriptive term? I'm not sure how this would relate to previous discussions we've had.
Mr. Chairperson, I may defer to Ms. Wyatt to respond to that.
Mr. Chairperson, I think we have that covered in the introduction, and we're using the term infrastructure to refer to those assets that the city uses for water, stormwater, wastewater, solid waste, transportation, and other city services. So it's fairly broadly defined under what's included and intended for the OCP.
So the other city services then become a future definition in terms of, say, parks and so on and so on?
Absolutely, Mr.
Okay,
Chairperson.
so not limiting, thank you.
No.
So just a couple of very large questions. I'm really pleased with the public engagement that went on here. I believe the document in front of us is rather lofty, and by that I mean the goals are very lofty. I would much prefer to have that than something limiting. So, however, that gets a little scary for me. There are some notions in here that talk about, leads to dollars and cents in financing and so on. And so in that regard, I get concerned on a personal level about setting too lofty a goal that we cannot attain and, in fact, follow through. I realize that devil's in the details, but I do get concerned about that. I'm curious about one item that's in here, and it's under finance on page 14. It's under 1.2, and it talks about similar, I'll just repeat the phrase, similar charges in excess of full cost recovery. Now that's a different phrase than I've seen before and that we've discussed before. Is this a requirement to a change of legislation, or is this a change in terms of the benefits package? Is this in term, I'm not sure where this goes.
Mr. Chairperson, it's true some legislation limits certain costs or certain fees to cost recovery levels, but that not all fees are restricted to that.
Mm-hmm.
So with further analysis using the benefits model, we could look at actually creating revenue through some of the activities that the city charges fees for. So that's what that enables.
Good. Okay. And I'm fine with that. Thanks very much. Reference is also made to, and I don't have it in front of me, and I apologize, but it was reference in terms of new revenue sources and so on. Can I ask specifically to this, while this is a public document, Was that notion derived from public discussion, or was that as a means of paying for what we are perhaps suggesting in the document?
Mr. Chairperson, it's both. It was something that had been discussed through public consultation in terms of understanding financial constraints, that we would need to look at new ways to pay for things.
So that was understood and acknowledged.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very good. I want to applaud the notion of asset management that's in here. I realize we've discussed that many times here. It seems to be very clear in the document and the method that we have to go forward on. I like that. I think there's also there's a couple of large concepts around housing or areas of development. I think there's a natural tie between housing and employment areas and the need to pay for all of the services that go in there. Again, I'm not sure that the community understands how things are paid for and to what level. In terms of property taxes, I think that concept needs to be flushed. I have a new coffee buddy. I hope he takes me up on my offer. I would look forward to that. The notion of density and intensification in that strategy, to me, is an education piece. This is not something that we should take for lightly. We have talked about this a lot. I would think that some of the people that appeared before us beforehand have acknowledged that as they continue to develop in new areas, it is naturally becoming more dense. But obviously the problem that we have is when we start re-looking back at infill developments, and I think that there's a notion that we have to educate the public on this, and ourselves, by the way, so that we, in fact, fulfill that notion. So, again, to the idea of what it looks like and so on, it matters to me greatly. And along that line, Mr. Carlson and I had a brief discussion, but it seems that in some other cities, and I use Edmonton as an example, there are community groups developing that may look at this notion as to what works in a neighborhood, what is compatible, and what is nice. And we might have to, I believe, formalize some of that a little bit. I love the notion of this document and the fact that it sets those lofty goals and it pushes the bar higher. I hope that what we have when we go forward in a month is a continued discussion, because we, in fact, have, Madam Clerk, set aside 2 days for this. We are welcoming the public on more than one night just to continue this discussion. Very healthy. Councillor Murray, if you would.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Microphone away. There we go. Okay, so thanks very much, Mr. Chair. It was interesting just listening to all the conversation, all the different pieces and parts. And in Appendix B and also in C, there's some discussion around regional. And I'm just going to read the last part of Appendix C. And it's optimize regional cooperation. Work cooperatively with surrounding municipalities, agencies, levels of governments, and other stakeholders to determine and evaluate opportunities for to collaborate to plan and potentially deliver services regionally. For us in our OCP, obviously critically important to us, but we are the heart of a fairly significant region. We were talking about 250,000 people. Our region, and when you go outside of our boundaries, just a short time, you're now within that same 250,000 or greater, just around us. So I'd like to see that in there, and I think that's a critical component to our long-term growth, is making sure that we are cooperative with our neighbors. They're advertising on our local media here. We're only minutes from all the benefits of being in Regina. So we need to, again, be mindful of that and try to work together. So very appreciative. I think it's great, and look forward to supporting it.
Thank you. So, Your Worship, I see no other speakers. I will turn the mic to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Referral motion to, as I intimated before, a discussion with Dundee about their specific concerns in their land and Harbour Landing. And it sounds like there's some work to be done to have meeting of minds on this, if you will. And I think it's important we resolve this one way or the other before this plan is formally approved. And I understand that this plan may still be amended and put in without going for amendment for the province, but I think that doesn't make the delegation feel comfortable. If we can find a way to resolve this in a way that incorporates it into the growth strategy, that's fine, or a better understanding by the delegation of what this category means so they don't feel set aside. I think it's important to do that. But before I move the referral motion, I'm wondering if Northridge should also be involved in this in the sense of them understanding where they fit in the growth strategy as well. So a comment by the administration on that first.
Mr. Chairperson, I'll have a point of clarification, but to the question, I would suggest that the delegation from Northridge had requested that, so we'll happily work with them. They may not be as far along, or I'm not sure in terms of what the information. And then just the question for clarification, is the intent of the referral to be separate from the recommendations, that the recommendations would proceed so that we can advertise the bylaw to come back on the 20th, and there'd be a separate referral for us to work in the meantime with these groups?
Yes, the intent would be the intent in as much as we can have this report back at the meeting of City Council in August, so we can, as a council, understand and hopefully have a resolution to this. I don't want to slow up the process. I think we're close to having a resolution, hopefully, and certainly don't want to hold anything up for that. I don't want to minimize that concern. That is a big concern, but not stop the process. With respect to Northridge, I understand it is a less mature development, but I certainly would like to have a discussion. So the referral would be that the administration do firstly meet with Dundee to an attempt to exchange information and to resolve differences before the final approval of this community plan in August, and that they also sit down with representatives of Northridge to address concerns of that development.
Okay. So this is a referral motion, so there's no discussion, but I want to make sure that Madam Clerk has caught up.
Just as clarification, is this in fact something that we could add as a number 6, that the administration work with Dundee and Northridge delegations in relation to these study areas prior to final approval of the document, rather than a full referral motion of the report?
That'd be fine. Okay. If the administration is okay with that, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Okay, so there is a referral motion, no discussion. Does anybody need clarification? No one is asking. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? There are none. Thank you. So that does go forward. So on the main motion, are there any other points of discussion or comments to be made? So there are 5. And to be clear, so everybody understands, this will be coming back to Council on August the 20th. We have set aside a special meeting that night. But I want to be very open about the fact that we have actually set aside the additional next night as well, should we have enough delegations or discussion on the item. So I will call a question on the main report. All in favor? Opposed? There are none. May I have a motion of adjournment, please? Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Everyone, have a good night.